I hope you all have had an amazing conference so far. Before I even dive into my intro and kind of give a sense of why I'm here to speak to you today, I wanted to go over some superlatives to set us up for success. The first is I want to acknowledge this is my apartment, so I'm actually doing this from home. And usually for these kinds of engagements, I will put up a fancy virtual background, but I feel so at home that I feel like that's not even necessary for you all today. I have a special connection to Baltimore City. Even though I was born and raised in Baltimore County, I have two parents that grew up in the city. My father was a Baltimore City firefighter for over 30 years. I played football, youth tackle football on the west side of Baltimore. I went to church for several years on the east side of Baltimore. And so I have a special connection with you all. And I just appreciate the warm welcome that I've already received and in conversation with, Chris and Kelly and all the amazing folks at BTU. I just thank you for the warm welcome. This engagement, so this keynote today is going to have a little bit of interaction, but I want the technology to serve your engagement and not to be an impediment. So I say that because I'm going to have some Zoom poll questions that will pop up throughout the engagement. There's only 3 questions. If you could respond to those, that would be amazing once that happens. But if not, if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat function in order to contribute. Speaking of the chat, I try not to do webinar style engagements. Again, I feed off of your energy. I love to hear your thoughts, your reactions. And since there will not be a Q&A for this particular engagement, I have a feedback form at the end that I'll ask you to complete where you can share your thoughts, your questions, and ideas there. But if you want to share those in real time, I encourage you to use the chat to do that. I won't be able to catch things in real time, but I'm going to have some of the BTU folks kind of download that chat so I could be able to see which ideas in particular resonated with you all. And I get a little long with it, so I'm going to go ahead and set my timer so that I have that. And I can't start this presentation without saying happy birthday to BTU. I know that you all turned 90 last year, and this is officially your 90th year. And usually, when someone turns 90, it's time for them to stop working. Like, usually, when someone turns 90, you want them to slow down and do a little bit less. But I know that you all are as active and as full, as ever before, and the importance of your work, especially given the political climate around education, is more important again than ever before. And what you see here is a photo of a young Stevie Wonder. I would sing happy birthday, of course, the Stevie Wonder edition, if I had the musical skills of one Stevie Wonder, but I do not. I play the drums, but I don't have that great of a singing voice. I want you to play that song in your head since I won't be singing for you all today. And now I wanted to start this presentation with a poll question, and we're going to see my Zoom skills in real time here. I'm going to launch a poll question that I want you all to consider. And that question, and it should pop up on your screen right now. What generation do you belong to? And so I've got several generations here on your screen. I don't think we have any Gen Alpha with us today, but definitely some Gen Z, some millennials, Gen X, and then some baby boomers. Also got a couple folks in the silent generation too. So thank you for being here as well. So it looks like Gen X is the dominant age band that is represented here. I want us to keep this picture in mind because I'm going to come back to the generational piece of things toward the end of our presentation today. So I'm going to talk about my story again, share a little bit about why I'm here today, what's kind of informed my message today, which is about intergenerational empathy and how that can really help us in our work in serving students and promoting student success. I'm going to cover a little bit of the history of BTU. I did my research for this presentation, and I'm happy to share that, the history of this organization has truly inspired me as an educator and inspires some of the ways that we can move forward and making sure that students are well taken care of in this current climate. And then I'm going to talk about exactly what does intergenerational empathy look like and how we might be able to practice it, not just in our classrooms, but in our places of work, and then also in our homes and our communities as well. And so I've got 5 photos that I feel like well encapsulates my journey in education. It started in 2017 when I competed in an organization called Future Business Leaders of America. I know you might have to squint your eyes a little bit to see which one I am. I'm the one that's third closest to the right. So I'm the third closest to the right. That is me on the national stage of the Future Business Leaders of America National Leadership Conference in the Public Speaking 2 competition. So that's really where I got my start as a speaker. I didn't just speak about business or student leadership, but I also weaved in the educational component too, given that Future Business Leaders of America is considered a career and technical student organization. Many of you all might be familiar, whether you're connected to it through the school that you're currently at, or an advisor or a faculty member, a teacher per se, that is leading a chapter of Future Business Leaders of America. Then I want to fast forward to 2019. This is me in Budapest, Hungary, where I'm in like a castle structure here. This is where I was studying abroad. I started in the late winter of 2019 and was supposed to study all the way through the spring of 2020. But unfortunately, I got called back because of the proliferation of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're just, I think it was yesterday that marked the official, I think that was the 5th year anniversary, or the 5th year, 5 years removed to the date where COVID-19 was, first burst on the national scene. And so that was a pivotal moment for me because it really allowed me to sit and think about what I wanted to do with my career, about a lot of the social justice issues that were being, front forward and front facing at the time. And that led me to Georgetown University, where I enrolled in a master's degree program in learning design and technology. And through that program, I learned a lot about learning design. What makes good education, what translates to good teaching, what are some best practices in terms of preparing our students, not just in higher education, but also in K through 12. Speaking of K through 12, 2024 is when I went back to Maryland FBLA, which was the chapter in which I competed in. And I'm speaking to over 350 students in the photo that you see here. An amazing moment that kind of encapsulates some of the work that I do now. And so President Brown mentioned that I not only do professional development for teachers and faculty, but also do it for students too. And I have a ton of fun with students. I'm actually going to Montana next week to speak to some K through 12 students, and I'm looking forward to that. And then we get to today. And I'm sure as soon as you saw this slide, your eyes went directly to this photo. I wanted to blow it up for people because this is one of my favorite slides to show when I work with faculty. If you're not looking, if you've got your back to the screen or what have you, it says, "Don't be that teacher." And it shows a buff guy, a buff fish, if you will, from SpongeBob. And it says that the content is greater than relationships. And I always show this at the beginning of my presentations to really set the tone for faculty. And I'm sure that you all in this room probably know this already and practice this philosophy already. But this is basically what my work has come to, is showing SpongeBob memes to try to get faculty and teachers to care more about their students. But in all seriousness, this slide right here, specifically this photo, represents some of the cultural challenges that we have in our classrooms today in terms of the power imbalance between today's students and the teachers that have been tasked with teaching them. And I was really inspired by a quote that I found in the most recent BTU newsletter. If you haven't checked it out, make sure that you check that out now. It's on the BTU website. And in doing my research for this talk, there's a quote from Dr. Loretta Johnson, former president of the Baltimore Teachers Union, served in the union for over 28 years. And this quote says, "The primary role of the BTU had always been to serve the students as well as the teachers." And I know that you all are a teachers union. And so it makes sense. And this is obviously the PSRP chapter. So you all have, collaborated with teachers in kind of creating a culture of, fair wages and work environments that are conducive to your well-being and your success. And I found it interesting that because you're a union, unity is built into your work. And so it's it's so natural for members of a union to be in community with each other. But what does it look like to charge faculty and staff, teachers and staff, to be in unity with students? And when I talk about unity, I'm specifically talking about how unity has been woven in throughout the history of BTU. So this photo that kind of encapsulates in 1974 when BTU teachers went on strike in the city of Baltimore, tried to call PSRPs into the classroom to fill in for those teachers. And in a display of unity, the PSRPs decided not to return to the classroom to ensure that the teachers were getting the contract that they were entitled to, that they were entitled to have based on the expertise that they had in the work that they were trying to do. And I also found it inspiring too that there is a history of students standing with PSRPs and standing with teachers. When I go back to 1966, I know this slide says 1870. This is where this photo is from. I couldn't find a photo from 1966, but if we fast forward to 1966, we find that Dunbar High School students stood in solidarity with teachers and PSRPs who were on strike, again, for fair wages, for fair working conditions, and for additional perks that they felt that they were entitled to and rightfully deserved. And so we see instances where unity is crucial in securing contracts and making sure that the district is able to operate in service of students. And the only way that we can do that is if faculty and staff, specifically teachers and staff, are their well-being is taken care of, and they're prepared and qualified to promote student success, not just through their teaching, but also at the district level as well, in terms of designing curriculum, in terms of transportation, in terms of cafeteria work and nutritional work, and making sure that students are getting everything that they need, not just the educational components of things. And again, so much of my talk is centered around unity today. And when I talk about unity, there's probably two reactions. So there's probably some of you that were like, Jordan, yes, we need unity right now, especially in 2025. Like, sign me up. Where do I go next? And then I'm sure there are some of you on this call that had the opposite reaction. You might have started by saying, Jordan, yes, we absolutely need unity. This is crucial, but this is impossible, right? Like, you probably rolling your eyes a little bit of like, oh, like this guy is here to talk about unity. And our unity is really being tested right now. And if I were to give a test on unity, I know that you all know the answers, at least to these two questions. First is that your legacy is rooted in unity. I mean, just simply the fact that you're called a union, unity is in your name. So if anyone knows anything about unity right now, it's the folks that are under the sound of my voice as I currently speak. And this comes at a time where our social media algorithms are literally built to deter us from reaching a level of unity. It's meant to keep us in our echo chambers and in our silos in terms of our political ideology, in terms of our views and our philosophies on education and on society and on labor and on all these different things. We literally have companies that are spending billions of dollars capitalizing on the fact that we are not united. And if you know, a second thing is that in order to have safer schools, in order to have better working conditions for teachers and staff, in order to, for schools to have good teaching spread across the entire building, not just a pocket of teachers who are implementing evidence-based strategies and are altering the curriculum and are teaching with a culturally relevant lens. We need the entire school to implement good teaching. And then lastly, in order to improve student outcomes, unity needs to be reached. And I know you all know this, again, because of your history in advocating both for teacher rights and then also for PSRP rights as well. And so I really want to galvanize us to look at unity. And again, not just from the staff perspective, but what would it look like for us as adults, again, at the district office and all these different areas, to build unity with our students. And there are cultural things that make this difficult. And what you see on the screen are some common phrases that I hear, and I'm sure that some of you might be hearing as well. And again, if your back is to the screen, I can read this out to some folks. The first, they expect everything to be handed to them. They're glued to their phones. Kids have no respect for adults nowadays. No one wants to work anymore. They're not thinking about tomorrow. And then the classic one, stay in a child's place. Not only did I hear that from my own parents, but I heard that from my parents' parents as well too. And I have another poll that I want to show us here, and we're going to have the opportunity to respond. And I want you to consider, how do you recognize these phrases? Do you use them yourselves? Have you heard them before? Some of you might not have heard of any of them before, but I want us to just consider this for a few moments and I'll let people respond. How do you recognize these phrases? Looks like all of us so far has at least heard them before, and some of us have used them as well. Yep, and I'll let that keep trickling in. Right. We've got one person that's never heard of them before, or at least two. It looks like we've got two people that have. The rest have either heard them or have used them. All right, so the poll is starting to slow down a bit. Give folks a few more minutes to answer that. All right. Thank you all for doing that. I just shared the responses. It looks like when it comes to these phrases, 28% of us have used these at least at one point, and then 70% have at least heard them before, right? Whether it's been said to them or whether they've heard other people use them in conversation. And then we have, a measly four people that have never heard of them before, and I'm sure you'll get well acquainted to them by the end of this presentation. And I showed this because I feel like, again, these phrases are indicative of the cultural relationships that we have with our students in the classroom. And it personally makes my work difficult. And I'm sure it makes some of your work, as far as the folks that are in this room, difficult as well. And let me explain that a little bit. When it comes to the term, they expect everything to be handed to them. When it comes to that phrase, it makes it hard for me to get faculty to rethink their traditional assignments, because the usual response is, oh, the students, they want everything handed to them, right? Why would I grant students accessibility requests when all they're doing is just trying to take advantage of the system? I had to do 30-page papers when I was in college, or I had to read 100 pages a night when I was in college. My students, I'm expecting them to do the exact same thing. That's kind of the mindset that's in correlation with this phrase right here. They expect everything to be handed to them. When we talk about staying in a child's place, I think about how folks that not only create curriculum, but also implement surveillance technologies into the classroom might say something like, stay in a child's place. And I can go a little bit deeper. When you look at a school district like the Houston Independent School District, I did a whole research study on this district when I was in grad school in my policy analysis and education class. If you look in HISD today, they literally have cameras in the corners of classrooms to surveil teachers, to make sure that teachers are teaching the content that's in the curriculum, and to make sure that they're not teaching content on DEI or going away from whatever the set curriculum is. And in addition to that, students have historically been excluded from building curriculum that they engage with, right? So where are we including students in the curriculum building process? And the folks that are in charge of, again, building curriculum and implementing surveillance technologies in our classrooms feed off the idea that students should stay in their place, that kids should stay in their place, that they shouldn't have any say or autonomy over what their learning looks like. And so that's where it could really get dangerous, where it's this sliding slope of how do you view your students' competency level, and are you integrating them into the process of their own learning, which we know through research, when you do invite students into their own learning, it actually leads to increased motivation in the classroom, and it leads therefore to student success. And then this last one, they're glued to their phones, which is one of the more controversial ones today. And we see across the country, we have school districts that are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into technology to ban phones in the classroom. And that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that can go to hiring mental health counselors. It can go to revitalizing the infrastructure of the school. But what's happened is that technology companies have been so powerful in their lobbying toward school districts, toward private education organizations, that school districts feel like they have to reach these measures in order to get phones out of students' hands. But I actually just picked up a book called Mobile Minded Pedagogy that really unpacks the learning goals that are lost as a result of not having phones in the classroom. And again, when we say that students are glued to their phones, we're assuming that it's their fault, when realizing that there are literally $1 trillion organizations, $1 billion organizations that are funneling all this money into make the algorithms that are captivating students' attention in the classroom addictive. So that's the other part of it too, is who's really the adversary in our classrooms? Is it our students, or is it the companies that are kind of encroaching on the classroom environment through their investment and making these technologies more and more addictive? And so these are some of the things that I try to unpack in my work. And when I talk to faculty and teachers about trauma-informed teaching, about social emotional learning, about metacognitive strategies, these are some of the mindsets that kind of cause barriers in empowering teachers and faculty to reach those learning goals. And again, so often we talk about the unity between PSRPs and teachers, or from staff to staff. But what does it look like to achieve unity with our students, not just unity in service of students? And I know I've shared a lot of information so far. We're about the halfway point in my message. So I wanted to share a quick poll with you all. This will be the last question that I ask. How are you currently holding this information? Are you with me? You're saying, I'm with you, Jordan. Maybe you need a little bit more time to think about this. Or I'm not with you yet, but I hope to be with you soon. I would love to kind of hear how people are receiving this information so far. Looks like 86% are fully with me. 13% need a little bit more time to think. Then we've got just 2% who I'm going to make sure I bring on the bandwagon by the end of this presentation. So thank you all for engaging with me so far. All right, so to stay on the unity test theme, if I had to create an equation for how we can think about unity in connection with student success and connection with student well-being, because again, even if we aren't physically in the classroom, each one of us works for this union and is a part of this union and works for the district because we care about the success of our students. And we think about the problem, which is the lack of resources from corporate organizations, from governmental institutions, from other institutions as well, nonprofit organizations. There are resources that our district needs, but instead, when we talk specifically about our tech companies, they want to sell us a chatbot, or they want to sell us a phone pouch without selling us the things, or essentially giving us the things. They have the capital to really put forward the resources that we need within our schools. Some of our schools are asking for clean water. Some of our schools are asking for more accessible desk setups, literally like the physical desks in which students sit in aren't comfortable for the students, let alone the pedagogy or the theoretical framework for a school. And then the solution, which I hope I've convinced you of so far, is unity, not just for our students, but with our students. How do we do that? And then the outcome is teacher and staff success and well-being, which I know BTU is working hard to ensure. And ultimately, that will lead to student success and well-being. But what does the implementation look like? How do we reach unity in a society where unity is not incentivized, where unity isn't bought and sold? Divisiveness is, but how do we reach unity? And I know what this looks like in the classroom. It looks like things like metacognition. You've probably heard of these before: social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching, trauma informed teaching, liberatory pedagogy, problem centered course design, and peer learning. These are all evidence based practices. I've got workshops on this stuff. I talk about this stuff all day with K through 12. districts and institutions across the country. But in terms of a solution that can work for everyone in this room, that applies to folks who might not be in the classroom, it's this idea of intergenerational empathy. And I thought I had coined this term when I was doing preparation for this presentation, but I did a quick Google search, and there are a few pockets of academia that are dipping their toe into this idea of intergenerational empathy, specifically Virginia Tech and their research center that's really forthcoming and really innovative in their approach of thinking about intergenerational empathy. And if I were to define it, it's the ability to understand and relate to people of different ages. And it could be developed through shared experiences, mutual respect, and patience. And I started this presentation with a poll where I asked what generation you come from. And I remember the most popular answers being Generation X, followed by millennials. And then we had Gen Z, and it seemed like we had everybody represented except the greatest generation and Generation Alpha. But again, I wanted to provide this age band so that people had that top of mind. And here's a graphic that shows some of the typical values and principles that are associated with each generation. So when you look at millennials, millennials are usually seen as digital pioneers. They usually have a more collaborative mindset when it comes to their work, and they want purpose-driven careers. They want to make sure that they're not just clocking in, that the work that they're doing is contributing to a more just and more equitable society. When we look at Generation X, they're known for being self-reliant. They're known for having, work-life balance, or at least seeking out work-life balance. And then they're also technological adapters. Many of them had senior level positions or managerial positions when social media, when smartphones started to proliferate in the mid and early 2000s, or even more so the later 2000s. And they had to adjust. They had to shift in that time. And so they've built a level of adaptability around technology. And when you look at my generation, Generation Z, we're known as digital natives. So we grew up around technology. We are very justice and inclusion focused. And then there's also the entrepreneurial creativity involved with our generation, as far as our personal brands, as far as creating our social media identities, as far as a lot of young people in my generation wanted to be content creators on social media. And so each generation has their principles that a lot of them would self-identify with, right? In terms of, I agree that, even I see it in myself, the fact that I'm a digital native, the fact that I'm justice and inclusion focused. But at the same time, while these are common values that are usually associated with these generations, we want to be sure that we're not creating a monolith of people that associate with these generations. But at the same time, acknowledging that these values come from the fact that when we are coming of age, in our preteen years and in our teenage years, when our brains are most plastic and we're still forming our brains aren't fully developed, we are inundated with culture. We're inundated with music and art, and obviously our work cultures that we learn about through our parents and that we hear about through our educational experiences. Even global conflicts have an impact on us. When we look at the baby boomers, there was post-war optimism is something that is usually associated with that generation. And so culture is always around us. And again, when our brains are most malleable, we start to develop these values that we hold on to that are really hard to get rid of once we reach 25, 26, 27, when our brains really become fully formed and some of our traditions, our routines start to become more rigid and hard to change. And I really appreciate intergenerational empathy's ability to have us look at labor, like the idea of labor itself. And it helps us put into perspective the fact that our views on the professional world right now in 2025 are rubbing off on our students. Even if we don't directly see our students or engage with students, our values on work informs how we analyze student data. It informs how we show up to the schools that we operate in. And ultimately, we're preparing students to go into the workforce. And so when we talk to young people about the skills that we're equipping them to have and be able to implement after graduation, how we feel about the professional landscape is going to rub off on them too. And then lastly, learning about ourselves and other generations, it could teach us about different ways of working and being. And that it's not just about grind culture. It's not just about being able to clock in and being able to work the hardest, but what are other ways that even other nations and other countries are thinking about work, and specifically the connection between well-being, mental health, physical health, financial health, and work as well. And I want to remind us that this works both ways because I can hear some people saying, Jordan, you're asking us to display intergenerational empathy with young people, but shouldn't young people be trying to empathize with us as well? My answer to that question is absolutely. But I would also say that it starts with it starts with us being empathetic toward our young people because we have the fully formed brains, we have the decades of experience of communicating and talking about our work and how our work fits within our theory of change, and we have a level of comfortability with communication that young people are still developing and growing into, not even considering the fact that many of us have a power up relationship in terms of our students. We have more superiority over our students, and so those two factors means that we should be the initiators of intergenerational well-being, even though it can be transmitted both ways. And I've never shared this story in a keynote, but I think it's a helpful one to share to put this into context. And this is an example of how not to display intergenerational empathy. I was in my sophomore year at McDaniel College, a small liberal arts college in Westminster, Maryland, and I was working at Target at the time. It was my first steady part-time job. I had summer jobs growing up. I was a lifeguard at the pool and I would, work at the Dollar Tree for the summer, but this was actually my steady job that I had throughout the semester. And at the time, I had a really rough time in undergrad, had a lot of mental health challenges, and I ended up seeing a mental health counselor at my institution regularly, and it changed a lot for me. But at the time, I was really struggling. It was one of those days where I had to go into work, I had to clock in, and I called my mom just to hear her voice because I wanted to talk to her about how I was feeling. And throughout the conversation, things started to get a little bit more intense. We started to raise our voices at each other. We started to go back and forth about what work ethic is and how I shouldn't be complaining and, all these different things. And my mom, rightfully so, in some instance, started to critique not only my view on work, but also how I was spending my money at the time. Because, college students, we could spend some money now. How I was spending my money at the time. And I remember we're on the call and I responded to something that she said by saying, well, at least I'm not working a job that I hate because I'm not trying to work a job that I hate. And the whole call just felt different after that. And we hung up not too long after that. And I've thought about this conversation ever since it happened. And it's been about 7 years ago now since that conversation took place, but it's always stayed with me. And I hadn't even apologized for that moment until a year ago because I really just needed time to process it. I was so embarrassed that I allowed myself to get that low, to be so hurtful and apathetic towards someone who instilled a lot of values in me and someone who was really holding me down in a loving way, providing the emotional support that I needed at the time in order to get through undergrad because I was having a really rough time in college. So that's an example of how young people, I never want to hear that from another young person again. And I want to make sure that even when I work with young people through organizations like FBLA, when I go to give these keynotes to young people, 13,000 students, 700 students, whatever it may be, about their future careers, having a level of grace with parents, for many of whom it's their first time guiding a young person through their careers. And because we spend so much time working, we spend half of our waking hours, most of us working, we feel so strongly about what work ethic means, about what professional accomplishment means. And I hope that intergenerational empathy can get us to reflect about our definitions and to be more fluid and flexible in our definitions of those various terms that I just described. And so, what does intergenerational empathy actually look like? At the end of this presentation, you'll have a survey where you can submit your information and you'll get the slides toward the end. I actually want to send you the research study that included these specific practices and a ton more in terms of displaying emotional, intergenerational empathy with teenagers. But I was able to adapt some of those practices from that specific study to think about how we can display this with our young students. And most of our students are either in Gen Alpha, so that 0 to 12 age group, and then some of them are in Gen Z, which is that 13 to 28 age group. So most of these practices apply to this age group specifically, those two age groups. The first one is to display a level of curiosity and empathy about careers. There's a lot of, I'll see the article in the Medium or in the New York Times, or I'll see a think piece on Substack talking about how a lot of Gen Z, they want to be influencers, right? In the social aspects of their work are really important. They're striving for work-life balance. And I see so many adults dismissing that, saying that students should try to strive for real jobs and to try to build a career without realizing that, young people, they have this level of autonomy and really audacity to build a career that's outside of the norm. I'm a professional public speaker doing this thing independent at 25 years old, right? Like I had to have a level of confidence in order to step out on faith and be like, this is what I want to do. This is the work that I'm called to do. And so empowering young people and realizing that this is not a deficit for them. They see these holes in our society and in our professional fields that they want to fill that hasn't been filled yet. And they're carving paths that haven't been carved yet. And so really being empathetic and saying, why do you want to have this particular career? Have you thought about combining careers? Maybe you can start with this field and then transition into another field. Or where do you see yourself in 10 years? And really being a deep listener in response to what they say, as opposed to trying to teach them a lesson necessarily. And so we can display a lot of curiosity and empathy when it comes to talking with our young people about their careers. And another strategy for encouraging intergenerational empathy is reflecting their words back to them. As they are developing their brains, they're also developing their vocabulary. A lot of them don't have the words to express how they feel about life after graduation, which for a lot of young people involves stress, it involves anxiety, it involves not knowing what to come next. And so the more we can reflect their words back to them and say things like, so what I'm hearing is this. So I heard you say this, but your mannerisms and your body language suggests otherwise. Really cultivating our deep listening skills as the older adults in the room, so that we can not only pinpoint what they're trying to say linguistically, but also through their expression too, their emotional expression, and then also their bodily expression too. And it's so easy to center our own stories. Obviously, we know the classic trope of, back in my day, we didn't have libraries and we had to get a phone book to call somebody, and all these different isms that we kind of throw around in terms of our generational differences. But it's so easy to fall into, this is what I experienced when I was 18, when a young person's life just doesn't really look like that now. And so asking more questions of our young people, trying to understand and reflecting back to them what they're telling us, instead of trying to reach back into our own stories to try to pull something out that they can resonate with. And then lastly, inquiring about generational language. I often run into faculty, specifically in higher ed, who don't quite understand the lingo that young people use today. And they think that it's unserious or unacademic. And obviously, academia has its own culture. There is a culture that's set to where this is how you cite sources in APA format. This is how you go about writing a paper. This is how you go about even writing an essay to your faculty member. But as students start to hone their storytelling skills and they start to be more comfortable in our academic and professional environments, empowering them to use language that resonates with them, to kind of ask clarifying questions about the language that they use instead of stifling their communication skills. And so if I had to do some work to try to remix some of these phrases, some of the phrases that we saw about 20 minutes ago now, if I had to remix, they're not thinking about tomorrow. What if we said, quote, how can we give them agency over tomorrow today? What are they thinking about today? How do they see their future 15 years from now? And getting them to really answer that question and be critical in that thinking and to develop those thoughts instead of trying to impose what tomorrow will look like for our young people. Instead of saying they're glued to their phones, what if phones were a sign of protest to the bad curriculum that some of these young people are subjected to learn from? And so if we see it as a sign of protest, we could say, okay, the problem isn't the student. The curriculum isn't culturally relevant enough. It's not aligning with what they see themselves doing after graduation. It's not focused on the critical issues that are impacting their lives, whether it be, what are taxes like? Like my parents are really stressed about taxes. I just want to learn about taxes. A lot of our schools are teaching that. A lot of our schools aren't teaching how to build relationships, which for middle and high school students is a crucial skill. Like, how do I navigate my personal relationships? These are the things that young people want to learn about. And so keeping those things in perspective, and then also realizing that, again, there are billions of dollars that are put toward marketing, building these algorithms, building these social media platforms to make them addictive. And then there are other technology companies that are in that same technology industrial complex that are then capitalizing on that distraction to sell us the phone pouches and to sell us chat bots and all these different things that are supposed to engage students, when in actuality, their neighbors are the ones that are drawing their attention away from the classroom. And so keeping those things in perspective as well. And then lastly, instead of saying kids have no respect for adults nowadays, what if we slowed down and we said we need to teach them intergenerational empathy? Because again, that has to come from us. They're taking the cues from us. Even if we don't say it explicitly, they're watching our moves. And so how can we impart that on them so that we can get that in return? But we have to model that first. And I want you to reflect on this question as we end today. What makes intergenerational empathy so hard to practice? As I've talked, you probably created some sort of movie in your mind as you think about, okay, what is this going to look like? How do I apply some of the things on today? There's a lot of theory. How do I apply it to my accounting work or my administrative work or my work at the front office at my school? Think about what makes it hard. What stands in the way of you implementing intergenerational empathy into your work? And as an organization, I really task BTU to continue to ask this question in addition to the questions that we see here. What do you want work to look like? Not just for PSRPs, not just for teachers, but what does the future of work look like? Because our schools are invested in that future too. There's a great quote that says that teaching is the profession that makes all professions possible. And so if we're making all professions possible through our work, what do we want those professions to look like? And how do we define work ethic? And how do we define what meaningful work looks like as the 8-hour work day starts to shift, as the 40-hour work week looks different, a whole lot different compared to what professional field you're in? Obviously, a lot of us are doing a lot of our work on Zoom and from home, and the home and work is kind of blended like this. What do we want our work to look like? And then how can we create a culture of care within our schools and workplaces for our young people to step into? And with those questions, I leave you. My name is Jordan Davis. Thank you all for your time. Before we leave here, I'm going to stop sharing. It's been amazing being with you all. I have a brief survey that I want to share. I just dropped it in the chat. Please let me know if this works. Maybe President Brown could click that link just to make sure it opens up and could let me know whether that works or not. Please take a few minutes right now to complete that, to ask your questions of me, to share your thoughts on what you think. And if you look for speakers or if you're looking for someone to grace your students and faculty, I'm more than happy to talk about that too. But thank you all so much, BTU. This has been amazing. I had a blast with you all. I had a great time learning about you all and conducting the research for this presentation. And I hope to stay connected with you all and have a great rest of your conference.
Jordan, thank you so much. We really appreciated your presentation. We're very proud to see a Baltimorean doing so well and being able to deliver what they've learned back to us. And your survey does work. And thank you for everything that you shared with us today.
Of course. Thanks so much, President Brown. I appreciate you. And take care, everybody.